And then, first of all, I'm David Lee White. The Lee is not there in my name or over here somewhere where it should be. But I wrote the book for Angry Grammarian. Jeffrey Barg, of course, wrote the music.
Look,
Um, and we thought that, well, first of all, before we do anything else, thank you. Um, we had this, was it Indiegogo campaign? No.
yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
Indiegogo campaign. And we hit the target and we were able to produce the show. And it was kind of successful beyond our wildest imagination. And we would not have been able to do it if we had not raised money through that initial Indiegogo campaign. And so thank you for doing that. And I hope that this is beneficial or interesting to everyone. And we're going to go through. We'll talk a little bit about the show and how we wrote the music, how we wrote the book, and then there'll be plenty of time for if you have any questions for us. And by the way, if while we're talking you have any questions, just start talking.
Please
There's
jump in.
so few of us. Don't worry about raising your hand. Don't worry about putting it in the chat. Just feel free to scream and shout like I know you can, Julie Zaffarano. So, oh, hi, Sam. I'm seeing your message now on PS2. Still at work. Great, great. No worries. Um, so, um, what I thought what we would start with is this whole project really kind of started with you, Jeff.
It did.
And the origins of it are not the show; they come from before that. And I thought maybe you could give us a very brief historical tutorial about the Angry Grammarian pre-musical.
Yeah, the Angry Grammarian as a character dates back to like 2007, when I had an idea. I probably had the idea very late 2006, very early 2007. I was working as a copy editor for Philadelphia Weekly newspaper, and if I had thought ahead, I would have like just grabbed a couple of Philadelphia Weeklies. Philadelphia Weekly was an alt-weekly newspaper published here in Philadelphia, and I worked there for many years. It was my first job out of college, and I stayed there for like 7 years and was a copy editor. It was my job to be the last person to sign off on every page before it went to the printer and went out to
God.
thousands of readers. And through that, really developed a passion for editing and a passion for writing. And after doing this for many years and also reading books like Eats, Shoots, and Leaves by Lynn Truss, which came out in 2004, William Safire's column on language, which was in the New York Times Magazine for many, many years. I thought, hey, I would love to write a column about grammar, about language, but sort of, do my own take on it. And I said, all right, well, I want to do a column about grammar. But what's the angle? What's the hook? It's like, I want to write in the voice of somebody who is like really interested in grammar, but he's like angry about it. Oh, maybe I'll just call it The Angry Grammarian. Okay, that's a good title. And so I started writing this column, and I should say that I first brought it to my colleagues at Philadelphia Weekly and said, hey, I have this idea. I want to write a column about grammar. And they said, that is a terrible idea. Just like to a person, everybody thought, nobody's going to read that. I was like, no, I think it's going to be good. I think it'll be interesting. I think that there's an audience for this. And they said, we think you're wrong, but yeah, sure, go ahead, try it. And so I did, and fortunately, I was right. It turned out that there was an audience of people who were interested in grammar, interested in language. And so I wrote the column for a couple of years, like 2007, 2008, 2009. A lot of that time, I wrote about Sarah Palin because she was running for vice president for much of that time, and it was easy. It was shooting fish in a barrel. Yeah, and had a lot of fun with it. Around 2009, put the column on hiatus. I was in grad school. And then 5 years later, I guess it was, I was talking with a very dear friend of mine, a guy who I'd gone to college with, and who had spurred me to write my first musical, which was back in 2011. He said, hey, I want to do a musical version of Henry IV Part 1. I want you to write it. I said, but I've never written a musical. He's like, that's all right, you will. And he sort of by sheer force of will, this is my friend Ben, he pulled this musical out of me. And we did it in the Philly Fringe that year. It was super fun. A couple years later, I was talking with Ben. I was like, "Hey, I think I kind of want to do another musical, but I don't know what to write about." And he said, "Well, what about your old column, The Angry Grammarian? Could that be a musical?" And I thought about it. And I was like, "Actually, yeah, I think it could." I had like in the past written just some like grammar parodies just for myself, and thought that those were fun. And so I wrote up a treatment, which is are treatments a thing in regular playwriting or just in musicals, David? I don't even know.
Yeah, sometimes,
Okay.
treatments, plot
So
synopses. Yeah.
yeah, a treatment is basically like a one-page narrative of what the plot of this show is, and would throw in like, okay, this song goes here and it's called this song goes here, it's called this, and just came up with a whole bunch of random song titles that I didn't even necessarily know what they were about, but they were song titles that amused me. Some of those actually did end up becoming songs. Some of them became songs that I threw away. Some of them became songs that are still in the show today. Worked on this for a little while on my own, and then was introduced to David through a mutual friend. And then David and I started working on the treatment together. You want to pick up the story here, David?
Sure. Well, and I think that it's interesting to point out, to me anyway, that you worked on this with another playwright who then got too busy and asked me if I wanted to do it. And I think that that's important to note because I kind of, every good career opportunity has come my way because I was a second choice. And I think that that is really important. And I have no regrets. It's just the way it goes, and I'm fine with it. But yeah, so she called and said that there was this opportunity, and she was going to have to bow out because she had gotten some other work. And so Jeff and I met, and I had written, although not produced at that time, one other musical, um, and I've since done a couple more. Um, and while I didn't necessarily know this going in, when I was met Jeff and was listening to the music and talking to him, um, I think that one thing that I'm always kind of looking for is the heart of every musical is the music and lyrics, right? There's just no, that's just what it is. And so the role of the writer is really to kind of fill in the spots and the parts of the story that aren't being told, that are, what more does this story need? How can we fill it in? And the one thing I really loved about Jeff's writing was that it was funny. And I am kind of a in another life, maybe I would have tried to become a stand-up comic or a comedy sketch writer on Sid Caesar's You Show of Shows or something like that. Like that is my dream job, is to be Dick Van Dyke in that little office with Maury Amsterdam and Rose Marie, right? Um, and so I was delighted that his lyrics were so witty and the music so catchy. It was very Tom Lehrer was the first thing that came to mind in listening to some of the songs. I hope that's okay, Jeff. I hope you love Tom Lehrer.
So when I was growing up, the first music that I listened to on my own was all of my dad's old LPs, which I still have, by the way. They're upstairs, and one of those is Tom Lehrer's uh, that. Oh yes,
Look
very
at
nice.
that. Yes.
Yeah. I'm forgetting exactly what the title is, but like that was the week that was, or this is the week
Yes.
that was.
Right, right.
Anyway, it had pollution, it had So Long Mom, it had uh,
Roasting pigeons in the
the
park.
Vatican Rag,
Yeah,
which I
yeah, yeah.
still love to this day. New Math as well, which so like that all had a huge influence on me.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and I kind of tell that, and I've always had a great affection for uh, uh, that kind of music writing, right? So I really saw this as Jeff kind of showed me the outline that he had made. So I think it's important to know too that Jeff really um, kind of has an intuitive structural mind, which was good for me because I don't. I like them. I like structure. I like plot formulas. I like different kind of stories, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But it is not a natural thing for me. So when someone presents me with an outline, I'm like, all right, you know. So um, it was. I had a friend. Oh my God, Julie, that's fabulous, but sad at the same time. Um, but I really liked that I was going to have this opportunity to write a comedy, which I love doing. But I wouldn't have to be responsible for all the funny parts because Jeff had already written a number of them. And I think the challenge would be to keep the pace going, to keep the tone of the show flowing throughout. Um, because I felt like the dialogue and the lyrics should have the same kind of pace and energy, or the dialogue at the scene should have the same kind of pace and energy as the music and the lyrics. So, so I guess that we worked on it for a really long time, and we did a couple of workshops. What year was the first meeting that we had, Jeff? Did we ever figure that out?
Oh gosh.
Is
I mean, I can search
the
my
late
email. It was probably like 2015
yeah,
would be my guess. Maybe even 20. It was probably either 2015 or 2016.
right,
I would
right,
guess.
because it's been a while.
Yeah.
And then we did two workshops. One was at Pulley and Buttonhole,
In
Pulley and
Jenkintown.
Buttonhole, and we
May
did it
it
with
rest in
a
peace.
what's that?
May it rest in peace.
Yeah, right. And we did it with a four-person cast. And then I guess it was about a year later we did it at
Players Club of Swarthmore.
Players Club of Swarthmore and expanded the cast to six. And along the way, did a lot of rewrites and everything. And then COVID, of course, became a thing, and it was scheduled to be produced in 2020, and obviously that did not happen. And so Jeff really has spent the past several years, trying to find a home for it, and we found this marvelous group called Peer Players, the small theater company in Philadelphia. They don't have a permanent space, young company. This is their, for their operating out of their basements and, but we were so impressed, in particular with Chelsea, who is kind of their producer, um, and that we really just got a good feeling that if she were in charge of making this happen, that it was going to go ahead. I, I certainly know how difficult it is to produce anything from the ground up, but she does this really old-fashioned thing called making phone calls. She doesn't send off emails and then say, well, no one responded, guess there's no money. She gets her hands dirty and she goes out and she raises the money, and it
Despite the fact that she's like 28, maybe. Like
yeah, yeah, she's really quite amazing. And I will say that, like, I entered into this thinking, well, we'll get a production regardless, even if it's, and I about Jeff, but I was prepared to kick in some money if I had to kick in some money, right? And we really didn't have to. I mean, she really like took care of everything, and every performance sold out before the show even opened. And yeah, shocking. And it's going to go up again in the fall. So is that okay to say?
yeah, yeah,
Okay, good.
yeah, yes. Let's say that. Sure.
Right,
Breaking
right.
news, everybody.
Yeah. So it is gonna, it continues to have a life, and I think that that's really, really great. Um, Jeff, do you want to talk a little bit about your songwriting process and how you came up with some of these ditties?
Sure. Yeah, there were a couple of songs I thought I would just sort of like walk through the process of how they came together, and how they actually continue to change. But also, it was something that you said, David, made me want to throw this in, that there are a number of moments throughout this more than 10-year process now where I feel like I, anyway, have kind of taken a bit of a leap of faith with, what we're doing or whom we're hitching our wagons to. Like the first one of those was meeting David. Like I met David, and I read some of his plays, and I was like, oh yeah, these are funny. I like these. And we met in person, and I was like, oh, this seems like a good human being who would be fun to work with. But
Sucker.
no, but like, I didn't really like, we really didn't know each other at
Yeah.
that time, and only got to know each other as we worked together. And another big leap of faith was joining up with Chelsea and Peer Players. They had produced, I think, 2 shows before. This was their first musical. As David mentioned, they don't have a permanent space. But we just kind of got a good feeling and trusted it. And so I think that I have gotten really lucky. We have gotten really lucky. But that's a natural part of the process, that I think is probably inescapable. So yeah, songs. The 2 songs that I thought I would walk through in some detail are the opening number, which is called "The Angry Grammarian," and the number that it doesn't close the first act, but it's the second to last song, and it sort of introduces our big conflict, which is the comma with too many names, also known as just the Oxford comma song. So I should say I have been a music enthusiast. I've been a musician since I first picked up a guitar in middle school. I wrote some really bad songs in high school with my really bad high school band. But didn't like I wasn't really much of a songwriter, and so I've never thought of myself as such, or had never thought of myself as such, I guess, before I started writing musicals. But in I think it was 2015, I took a songwriting workshop with a woman named Erin McEwen. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of Erin McEwen. She is what I call XPN famous, which is to say she has had a number of songs that have been played extensively on WXPN, which is my favorite radio station. It is the radio station where I worked all through college. And if you're looking for some of her music, first I'll type her name in here. She has a bunch of albums. Probably her song that has been the most famous is a song called Blackbirds. It's a great song. I still love the song. It came out like 97, 98, something like that. And yeah, Blackbirds is probably my favorite single song of hers, but my favorite album of hers is an album called Grand, which came out, I'll say like 2003-ish. Anyway, she was doing in, I think, 2015, a songwriting workshop in media. And it happened to be happening over my birthday weekend. I was like, I'm gonna do this as a birthday present to myself. I'm gonna go and learn how to write songs. And my goal in going to the songwriting workshop is to come out of it with the opening number to this Angry Grammarian musical that I had started working on, but and had a couple of songs under my belt, but again, like really didn't know what I was doing. So I'm gonna get some tips, get some tricks, and see if I can come out of it with an opening number, because the opening number is, I think, one of the hardest songs to write, because it has to do so much work. It has to introduce the characters, it has to introduce the theme of the show, it has to set the tone for what you're going to see over the next 2 or so hours, and that's really hard. And so I thought, all right, I want to try and do this here. I actually found, just moments before we signed on here, my notes from that songwriting retreat. This was the handout, but it's like 6 pages that guided us through the weekend, and these are my handwritten notes from that weekend. So that's pretty cool. And I want to share a couple of tips that Erin shared for just like ways to get started on a song. She has she calls these tips for getting started and clearing writer's block. She suggests things like retell a news article. Like if you read a news article that you found interesting, and this, by the way, I think is also a great way to get started. Like if you want to write a play, I love those like ripped from the headlines plays, where you can dramatize a moment or something that happened in history. Go to a museum, see a movie or a concert, do a crossword, use a photo prompt. Like look at a photo and say, all right, what does this say to you? Copy a song that you like, learn to play a song that you like, write a bad song. This is actually a huge one, and something I do all the time. If I can't come up with something good to write, I just write something bad, because number one, it will not infrequently end up being better than I thought it was. And number two, just having something down and not staring at a blank piece of paper gives you something to work with. So then I want to talk about the Aaron's tips for how you start a song. And there are a bunch of different ways to do this and a billion examples in popular music of these things being used successfully. First thing, like starting with an expression like hey or oops or excuse me. Something that grabs the listener and makes them pay attention. Same thing with like counting. Counting into a song makes people pay attention. One that jumps to mind is like the 1, 2, 3. My baby don't mess around because she loves me so, and this I know for sure. That is obviously "Hey Ya" by Outkast. It's just like the first one that comes to my mind. Third, telling folks what to do. Put your hands up. Give me all your love. Jump. Like giving a command that makes people sit up and take notice. Asking a question. This is a huge one. There are so many songs out there that you know really well, and you've probably never thought about the fact that they start with a question. Will the real Slim Shady please stand up? How many roads must a man walk down before you can call him a man? How does a bastard orphan son of a whore and a Scotsman dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot in the Caribbean by impoverished squalor learn to be a hero and a scholar? Sorry, I screwed that up, even though I have Hamilton sitting right behind my head. Like, there are a billion songs out there that start with a question, and it makes the audience listen. It makes the audience pay attention. What I would call repetition, she calls it a stutter in here. And actually, will the real Slim Shady please stand up? Please stand up. Please stand up is another good example of that. Another example is don't stop the beat. Anytime you repeat a syllable or a short phrase, that is another good way to just like make something catchier. What are some other I mentioned counting. Those are my favorites. And so I decided to use a couple of these all at once to start the opening number. And the opening line that I came up with was, how are you all so wrong? I said, all right, I know I want this to start with a question, and I'm going to use this repeating "so" as a theme. And that's where that line came from. How are you all? And that's the opening line to the opening number. How are you all so wrong? I thought, you know what? This is a way to, it grabs the audience, it implicates the audience. I know that the audience who's coming to see a show called The Angry Grammarian, this is something that they have felt before. They have walked around the street wondering why and how are you all people so wrong. And so I thought, all right, that's where I want to start. So that's lyrically how it got started. So let me talk about musically. Music is simple. Like, you can make it complicated, and plenty of people do so very well, but you can also make it simple, and that is most of the Western music canon. I really love a descending bass. Many of my favorite songs in the world have this. I can angle this down. Another thing that I should mention. I play guitar. I'm a guitarist. I'm a really bad pianist. But I've played guitar again since I was like 12 years old. Most of this show was written on guitar. One or two songs I did primarily on piano, and that was actually another tip from Aaron, which is if you're used to writing on one instrument, try writing on a different one, because you're going to come up with something different. So like the second song in the show, it's called "The Right Space." It starts out with this riff that goes. I originally wrote that on piano, and I probably wouldn't have come up with it on guitar. That's another thing, matter though. I really love this progression, which appears in a billion songs in Western music. It goes. It is G. This is technically a D suspended fourth slash F sharp, but it's basically like a, a D chord with the third in the bass. I know these are like technical musical terms that I'm using here. Oh, David, you're not hearing the guitar at all? Really? What about when I stop talking?
Try to get now play. No, for some reason, you know what? Step back from your computer a little bit. Maybe it's overwhelming the.
No.
Like this much, this much.
Okay, so you know what it is? It's actually, so Zoom has these settings that cut out background noise,
Mhm.
and it thinks that my guitar is background noise. So I will try and actually, David, how about why don't you talk for a second while I try and change my settings, and then
Sure,
I'll get
sure.
back
Do you
to
want?
it.
Does it help since I'm the host if I change the settings, or does that
I don't think
matter?
so. I think it has to be my computer.
Okay, okay. So, yeah, one thing that uh, that Jeff was saying that reminded me of, and we'll talk a little bit about this when I talk about like story structures and things like that, is that the one thing I think that this show had going for it, even before Jeff wrote a note or even before I wrote a scene, is that it was just a really good idea. And I think that you can't underestimate an idea that somehow jibes with people before they have even seen a moment of the show itself. And I would not have anticipated that that would have been the case. But Jeff knew. Jeff had been writing this column, had been corresponding with people, knew that there was an audience out there for grammar geeks and people that had a kind of a fascination with it. Um, and that has been one of the biggest learning things for me in this is that you know, you can buy yourself a lot of goodwill if you just have a show that is born from an idea that everyone wants to see, you know.
Which is, that's we we sold out the run. We didn't sell it out based on word of mouth. It was sold out before anybody had sung a note. And yeah, that's very true. All right, can you hear this better now? Maybe. No.
No.
Okay, I won't play guitar. That's fine. Um, that's fine. I can just talk. Even though I'm frankly much more comfortable when I have a guitar between you and me, but
You can still
whatever.
hold it.
What's that?
You can still hold
That's just a prop.
it.
That's fine. So yeah, so came up with this way to start it, and I thought, all right, this is how I'm going to grab people. How are you all so wrong? Then I'm going to repeat that line mostly. How have you been or see, actually now I have to play it because I don't remember the lyrics otherwise. So it's how are you all so wrong? How have you been so dumb for so long? So exact same idea, reworded ever so slightly. Why do I have to tell you all this in a song? There aren't that many words that rhyme with wrong, and that line I was actually I'll tell you when we get to the end of talking about this song what has happened to that line, but that was a line that I was actually never quite sure if it worked right because it was the third line of the song in the first song of the show, already sort of like establishing, hey, we are doing a musical here and we're acknowledging that by kind of breaking the fourth wall a little bit. I wasn't sure how I felt about that, but went with it anyway. And then the fourth line is just mostly repeating that first line, that you've just been so wrong for so long. And then from here, I wrote a verse, or I guess this would be the pre-chorus. That was the first verse, that did not end up making it into the final show. It goes, I know what's best for you. I'll tell you which words are true. You'll hear my point of view, the only one worth listening to. It was okay, but later on, and I'll explain how we got to this, I decided that it wasn't as necessary as some of the others. What we ended up doing is the pre-chorus that used to go into the second chorus. we got rid of the second chorus entirely, and I took that pre-chorus from the second chorus and just moved it up to the first chorus. And so now that part of the song goes, they say, quit playing umpire. They say it's all the same. Misplace that modifier, and they'll see just who's playing games. And so we've got the 5 chord. It's ready to dive into the chorus, which goes, "'Cause the way you get things wrong, it makes me wanna cry. The way you write, it's just not right. Time to get angry about something that matters for a change." That line repeats a couple times. Matters for a change. Matters for a change. We need some change. And here I will actually jump ahead a little bit and say, this is a big difference between songwriting for a song versus songwriting for a musical. So those 4 lines that repeated, matters for a change, matters for a change, that is what you heard if you came to see the show. That is not what you will hear if you come to see the show in September, because David and I sat down after we closed and said, all right, where can we trim? Where can we, like, the whole show preaches being precise and being concise. How can we be more concise just in the songs? And I was like, this line repeats 4 times and it's saying the exact same thing. We don't need that. And so when you come to see the show in September, that's going to be time to get angry about something that matters for a change. Second verse, who and who find so much to get wrong. I'm going to get back to talking about that second verse, but first I want to jump ahead to the bridge, because this is another thing that I learned from Aaron McEwen. And it's something that I think I knew inherently just from listening to music, but hearing it spelled out like this was super, super helpful. The bridge of a song, you don't need a bridge if you're writing a song. It's a good idea, though. It's worth it to try writing a bridge. And the really great thing that a bridge provides is, in British songwriting, like the Beatles called this the middle 8, and that refers to the middle 8 measures that usually come after the second chorus, essentially, and before the last chorus. It's an opportunity to provide a different perspective. All right, I've just spent 2 verses and 2 choruses telling you how the world is. Let me tell you about how the world could be for a couple of measures before I play you a last chorus. Or let me bring in somebody else's perspective, have somebody else come in and provide another angle that is not what we have heard up until this point. Musically, it changes. Usually it'll get brighter or darker, one or the other. In this case, the perspective that I bring in is something brighter. It's, I can see a world where everyone writes perfectly. No more problems. No more red marks everywhere. So, he spent 2 verses and 2 choruses complaining about how everybody's wrong, but there's this vision. And by the way, this is, what he wants to achieve throughout the entire show is just a world where everyone writes perfectly. And so that is sort of the shift in perspective that the the bridge provides. So that's where the bridge comes from, and this is true in, again, most songs. It's true in a lot of songs from this show. And then, closing it up with another chorus. And then the last thing that I want to mention about this song, or last couple of things, are ways in which we have revised it and continue to revise it. So that line that I just sang, I can see a world where everyone writes perfectly. That did not used to be that line. It was close to it. For years and years and years, for like 10 years, that line was, I can see a world where everyone is perfect. That was it. But from time to time, I would go out to open mic nights and play these songs just to like give them a test run and see what people reacted to. And about an hour before I was going to play at an open mic night really just a couple of months ago. It was just in January. It occurred to me to change that line, like just those couple of words, to I can see a world where everyone writes perfect, pause, Lee. I was like, oh, that could be funny. Tried it out at the open mic night. It got the biggest laugh of the night. I was like, all right, I guess that's now part of the song. That's part of the show. So that rewriting is constantly happening. I mentioned that David and I got together a couple of weeks ago, and rewrote some of the first verse to push some grammatical jokes that first appeared in the second verse and push them up into the first verse to sort of give folks more of a sense of the show that they were about to see. This was actually a problem that it had bothered me for a long time. And Adam, who is on the screen right now, he and I were having a conversation about this. And Adam helped me see what this problem was and how to fix it. And I'm so gratified about that and cannot wait for people to hear. Like, they won't notice what's different about the opening number, but I think that they will like it better, and I think it will go over better. We'll find out. So yeah, that is sort of the detailed version of how that opening number came about. Well, I talked about that for longer than I anticipated, and so I'm going to just very, very briefly talk about the comma with too many names, to say that the writing for this one was very different because it actually came almost verbatim from a column that I wrote in 2000, probably seven. Somebody had written in asking about, do you use an Oxford comma? And I said, no, and here's why, and wrote this column again. It was like 2007 or 2008. And then I knew that I needed a song in the show about the Oxford comma. And I thought, well, I liked this column that I wrote a number of years back. And so lifted all of the themes, many of the lines verbatim from the column, and just made it so that they could rhyme. And then it just pisses people off, and that's great because it's all about the Oxford comma. So anyway, I will pause there. I've been talking way too much, and David wants Julie, you're trying to start a fight with me. But yeah, David needs to talk about the other half of this, which is very, very crucial to making a great show. So I'm going to shut up. Go ahead.
Oh, um, I it's so funny listening to you. First of all, those are things that we've never had this conversation, which I think is amazing. Um, but yeah, one of the things I really love working with collaborators, whether it's co-writers or composers especially. Um, but I think that the reason I do is I'm really interested in shows that are not a singular point of view, in which more than one artist has to kind of come together and find a mutual point of view, or just to kind of allow their differences in point of view to kind of exist. And I think that that is really, really fascinating. So, Jeff's the grammar guy. I'm not, certainly I have an interest in grammar. I'm a writer, but I've learned it so as not to embarrass myself. I've never like had, an interest in necessarily studying grammar. So I think I spent a really long time, probably too long. I think maybe I didn't have quite as much faith in the beginning as Jeff did about there being a real audience for this, thinking, yeah, it's about grammar, but what is it really about? And but luckily, Jeff had already kind of done part of that work, and so I really wanted to lean into what makes people angry. Why do we insist that people obey the rules? What are the conflicts that arise when we think there's one way to live and one point of view, and someone comes along and has an opposing viewpoint? Um, and so I really kind of had all that in my mind. And one thing that I have a love-hate relationship with in writing are story formulas and story archetypes. I love them, I collect them, I remember them, I use them, but I also recognize that they can be tyrannical. I also recognize that people can really use them to critique all of the spontaneity and joy and creativity out of a work of art sometimes if they're not doing it correctly. But at the same time, they're so helpful, you know? Um, So I have a lot of things that I've studied this technique called playmaking, which I know Midge has worked on. Julie, you may have done that as well. It comes from the 52nd Street Project in New York. It's a technique for teaching young kids playwriting, but it's so simple and effective and character based that I use it all the time. Um, Booker's seven plots, or is it nine plots? Seven plots, which he's an academic that basically says that all storytelling can be boiled down to seven essential plots. Um, and so I'm going to kind of share my screen. These are things that when I teach dramatic analysis, I tend to teach. Can everyone see that there? Let's see. I think this will work. How do I get that to go up? So these are things, and I kind of always have these in my mind when I write. Um, all storytelling is woven around basic plots and archetypes. And now I think it's important to point out that like there are other academics that say no, there aren't seven, there's 31, and I find 31 a really high number to count to. So I find seven to be kind of a in that sweet spot for me. But the plots are, and so overcoming the monster, rags to riches, the quest, voyage and return, comedy, tragedy, and rebirth. And so I tend to always have these running around in my head. And the idea is not that I write to these plots. I don't step back before I write and say, I'm now going to write a rags and riches story. I just start writing, but inevitably, these plots will come up. And sometimes they'll even change. And sometimes they operate in tandem with one another. And I just think it's important to recognize when they come up so that if you wish to follow them to their logical conclusion, you can. Um, Very briefly, overcoming the monster, even though there's a literal monster on the screen, it's not necessarily a literal monster. It could be a corporation. It could be a philosophy. It could be an idea. If we were to put it to Angry Grammarian, Greg is his monster that he's trying to overcome is cultural ignorance about the rules of grammar, right? So that would kind of typify his struggle. Um, and again, we have, and by the way, I'm certainly happy to send these out. I don't want to spend too much time going over them in detail as if this were a college class. I'm happy to send this to you though. The monster threatens destruction. It is holding something hostage. The hero has a magic weapon. Um, there is that moment in Angry Grammarian where Greg has his pen and he runs out and he's like on an insane mission to correct all of the misspelled signs in his town, right? And he kind of sees himself as being in an overcoming the monster plot. Um, and then there are, of course, some examples. Any action films you've ever seen, right? Any horror movies are very much in line with that. Rags to Riches is the second one. These are rooted in folk tales. This is one of the more basic stories, and you've heard of it, but I think that it's a little bigger, I think, than what we're used to. Um, the rags to riches hero is someone that has nothing and then has something. But I think that the key element is that he or she, sorry, then loses that thing but learns from it, is a different person, a changed person than they were before. Um, and so that's kind of an example of that. Of course, King Arthur, Little Orphan Annie, of course, is almost a literal rags to riches story. Um, the Quest is Wizard of Oz. This is the one that I like the best because you can write about relationships with this because it's usually there may be one lead person on the quest, but they amass allies on the way. They're searching for something, but they have people that they enlist. And a great deal of the story is about the bond that they discover while they're all on this quest. Um, obviously there's a priceless goal. In Wizard of Oz, they all have separate goals that they're out to achieve. We all know that. Um, the Quest falls into this, but so do the Indiana Jones movies, Lord of the Rings, um, Voyage and Return. And I'm putting this on the briefly because I love that picture. Um, Voyage and Return is a hero leaving their familiar world to go to a different world, separated from the first. So they leave. This is Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court, right? Is probably the archetypal story of that. And it's kind of exciting at first. They're in a different world, and it's wonderful. But then it becomes threatening, and they have to get back. A lot of fairy tales fill this. Back to the Future is my personal favorite example of this. Um, then comedy. Comedy is not necessarily laugh out loud. Um, it can also mean that it's complications between characters. One person wants something, but another person can't let them have it because it interferes with what they want, et cetera, et cetera. And it's about the growing complications. Usually this elicits laughter, but it doesn't necessarily have to. One thing that I like about comedy, excuse me, is that one side is life giving and the other side is life denying. And I always like thinking about that when I think that there's a conflict with two sides. Which side is giving life and which side is denying or creating darkness? Um, and then, of course, lots of examples, everything from Midsummer Night's Dream to The Office. They all follow the same basic ones. I should add, too, that because obviously I thought a lot about comedy writing this, there are also some very specific comedic scenarios that I always put into comedies, and they're in this show as well. And they are things like Top Banana, two people trying to outdo one another. There's one called Master and Servant, which is a smart person trying to teach a dumb person how to perform a task, and they get it wrong. There is Uncontrollable Body, which is where someone's is out of control. Maybe they're drunk, or maybe they're just having a nervous breakdown. There's a lot of Greg out of control in Angry Grammarian. Um, there is Shared Secret. That is when we know something and we share a secret with a character, but the other characters don't know it, and that kind of elicits a lot of laughter. And then there's a character that Greg definitely is, which is a braggart captain character. And a braggart captain character comes from the Italian Commedia dell'arte, and that's any time there is someone in a position of authority that absolutely thinks that everything they say is right, and they are adamant about it, but we see their flaw. We see where they tend to be going wrong. Um, and then, of course, while it didn't have a lot to do with this show, this tragedy, which, by the way, is not simply bad things happening to good people. Typically, in dramatic scenarios, the tragic hero is at least partially responsible for his own misfortune. Um, they should have seen it coming, right? It's like Oedipus. Oedipus should have seen it coming. Um, so I tend to always kind of have these. Oh, sorry, the seventh. This is most important. This is the most transcendent one. Is rebirth, and this is the one where the world, the existence that our main protagonist started out the story with is different than the world, the existence that they have ended the story with. Whether it's because they have changed location, usually it's because they have a new philosophy on life. They have new people around them. Greg definitely goes through a rebirth in this show. So you can kind of see, just in this show alone, how many of these stories are operating. So when I listen to Jeff's music and read his plot synopsis, I tried to kind of really take a look at which of these stories were operating so that when they came up, um, I could deal with them. Now, One last thing in this. Playmaking is another technique I use, but I don't think we need to go through that. But it is very character based, and it the thing that I like about it is that it applies secrets and wants and fears to all of the characters. And if you always know what a character wants or fears or what their secret is, you really can use that to drive the plot engine. Um, One thing that I just want to highlight here, if I can actually do that, is this action statement. This is the statement that I have in my head with everything that I write. And it's always the same, by the way, in anything. Our protagonist, blank, when confronted with blank, decides to blank and discovers blank. And I just fill in the blanks. And that those things can change, those things that fill in the blanks. Several people can see the same story and come up with different blanks to fill in. There's no necessarily right or wrong answer, um, but the statement as a whole implies a journey and it implies change. All stories are about individuals changing and not being the same person at the end that they were in the beginning, um, or at the very least, if they are the same at the end, they had a choice, right? They became aware of who they were and they've chosen not to change, which in itself is kind of a change. I only throw that in there because Larry David just finished his show, and his big thing is my character doesn't change, right? But he does. He's making the choice not to change, and that in itself is a change. So I know that I kind of rushed through all of those, but hopefully that gives a little bit of an idea, um, so that every time I'm working with Jeff or any other composers that I work with, I try to keep track of that. Um, I look at the lyrics and I say, what step of the character's journey does this set of lyrics take us on? Um, and that's that. I hope that that was interesting. I've never had that conversation with you, Jeff.
Yeah, I just learned a lot. And just a note about, like, when David, you talk about looking at the lyrics, or when I look at the book, one thing that we haven't said but is worth noting is that in a musical, typically, there are obviously exceptions to this, but typically the songs start when the emotion is heightened to the point where you have to sing.
Right.
It doesn't, like that's not to say that David couldn't write emotion that would fulfill the moment. But typically, it's the scene builds and builds and builds and builds, and when you have nowhere else to go, that's when we break into song.
And this is something that I had a conversation. Oh, I'm hearing an echo. Sorry. Is everyone else hearing that?
A little bit. Let me try muting myself.
Oh, okay. It was you. One thing that I had a conversation with Dawn a lot about, our director, is I called it ramping up. I feel like it's my job to build the ramp to the song, so that we've got a song, we've got conflict happening, or we've got a scene, we've got conflict happening, and then the song is over here, and somehow I have to build that transition. I have to build the ramp that allows uh, the scene and it should feel organic, right? It should feel like we're not making an unnecessary leap into the song.
I know that, first of all, I want to call it that we are at 8:27. I am totally good to hang out and talk as long as folks have questions. David, I know you said you were good to
I am
to
too.
that as well.
In fact, if anyone has any questions, this would be a great time to kind of like.
Well, Adam put a couple in the chat, and so I can start with those.
Yeah.
Adam, yes, about two things to get back later: descending bass line and songwriting a song versus songwriting a song for a musical. Two, yeah, really interesting topics. So I think I found, while David was talking, the setting to change. Can you hear the guitar better now? All right. So yeah, especially in the 90s when I learned to play guitar, there were a lot of songs that went like this. And so so that's doing it in technically A, but we're going to call it G because I'm playing with a capo. But you can do the same thing in C. There are tons of songs out there that do both of those things. I decided to put both of them in my opening, and it goes. So I just put them one after the other. Really just because I like the sound of it. There are so many songs out there that I love that go like that. I think it's, they're really simple chords. This is a G, this is a E, that's a F sharp minor 7, but basically it's a really basic progression that you'll find in a billion songs in Western music. And whenever I write songs, I really just kind of like noodle around until I land on something that I like. It's not much more scientific than that. And I'm also I have trouble sometimes writing melody, and so if I'm looking for a melody, I listen to some of the chords that I'm playing, and so the melody of that part of the song really just follows that bass line. It's how are you all so wrong. It's almost exactly the bass line there. So yeah, I like it, and so I play with it a bunch. And by the way, other songs will. I played with the bass line as well. The other one that I mentioned, the comma with too many names. It starts out with just some chords like, whenever someone asks me how do you feel inside about that Oxford comma, my feelings I can't hide. So listen close, listen here, let me be your guide. That comma is responsible for illiteracy nationwide. And then it does this. It's just that bass walking back up. So yeah, whether the bass is walking up or walking down, I find it evocative, and so I play with it a lot. Another thing that I'll mention is that Dar Williams, for folks who know her, she's a fantastic songwriter whom I've been a fan of for many years. She wrote a book not too long ago about songwriting, and in that book she says, all chords are equal except for B7. B7 is really cool. And I write with a lot of B7s just because it sounds so good. And it's in the comma with too many names. It's that last chord right before the chorus that goes, Oxford comma, Harvard comma, serial comma, you've got too many names. Yeah, it's just like, it's so unsteady, it's so unstable that it needs to go somewhere, and it gives you this sense of forward motion, and I really love that. So yeah, that's all of the wisdom I can offer on ascending bass lines, just playing with bass lines. But songwriting a song versus songwriting a song for a musical, this was something that I learned along the way and was kind of a revelation. After our very first stage reading, we got this is one we did at Pulley and Buttonhole. I got some feedback from many of you probably know Erin Riley at theater, who at the time was at Theater Horizon. And she had come to the show, and I had asked her for some feedback. And she said, remember that you're writing a musical. It doesn't have to follow a regular song structure. And that was something that had not occurred to me before. I write, because this is, most of the music I grew up on, I write songs that have a pretty standard, like, verse, chorus, bridge, chorus. That is the structure that I always start with and then deviate from it. But what I learned from Erin, and this came out of some conversations David and I had too, is that when you have gotten across what you need to get across, you can just change things. You can just end the song. We had a whole song called The Effect of Your Affect. We still do have a song called The Effect of Your Affect. In the first stage reading, maybe in the second one too, I don't remember. It was like, I don't know, 3, 4, 4.5 minute song with a bunch of verses and choruses. But at some point I realized, or somebody pointed out to me, that like the song had accomplished everything it needed to accomplish after this first chorus, and so we just cut it off there and had it segue directly into the next song, which is Apostrophe Anarchy. The opening number as well, I played you those couple of lines that were in the original version, but it was too long. Like the song had, those verses and those choruses had already accomplished everything that they needed to accomplish. So let's just get to the next scene. Just like move on. So that was a real revelation for me as a songwriter, to see that you could break open the song structure in a way that served the story better.
I have a
A
question
question
for
for
David.
David.
I've written
I've written
myself
myself
twice
twice
now.
now.
Um, I had heard a lot of Jeff's songs long before it was a show, and knew some of the plot and saw it evolve. So you talked a lot about story structure, but the thing that struck me watching the show were the actual words between the scenes. Like I know there's like some amount of magic to that. That's the job you do. But anything you can talk about how you make that happen, because some of the scenes are so short and they all had at least one, usually more jokes in it. Like how you find those little moments of like punching it up, keep it. I know that's part of the energy, and but the songs themselves have jokes. But that was the thing that was new and kind of a revelation to me to watch, to see how the show was strung together with sometimes even very short scenes, but sometimes longer ones, and just with character development and character voices and the jokes. Like, how do you, when you're sitting there being like, okay, I have my story structure, I have these songs that are maybe these like tent poles that take me through the show, I need to find words to put in here and make them fun and entertaining. Where do you get that?
Well, thank you, first of all. But I would say that the first thing I do is I write scenes that are way too long. And I tend to, that's kind of how I'll find the character's voice, right? If you ever read the first draft of a scene, characters are constantly saying, "What? You heard me?" Like it just, and then uh, and then I edit, and then I go back and edit, and that process, really kind of goes up their opening night. Almost not quite this time, but there was, a good week or two out. We were cutting dialogue because it just wasn't clipping. Like it seemed to settle, and in some plays that's okay, but for this particular one, because we did want it to move fast, um, so I wrote a scene that might have had 30 jokes, and ultimately I just kept the five that worked. you know, but I love doing that. I will say I have a background in sketch comedy as well. So I really love sketches. I love the good 4 minute sketch, that almost every sketch on SNL, and not all those are great, let's admit, but they're all about 4 minutes long, right? So I've seen an awful lot of that, and the economy of language that you need to have to get those jokes, is
Is there a structure that you look for in terms of finding a simple joke to get you from one place to another, where you're like, this scene is short, accomplishes it, but I need to find like a way to punch it up? Like, do you have something, or is it just you let your brain go?
I kind of let my brain go, but I really do rely a lot on those five comic premises that I kind of sped through when I was talking. So like, if so okay, so Greg and Lisa in the show, they're always competing, right? So that the essence of that is the top banana comic premise. It's people always trying to outdo one another. So I knew that whenever I had a scene with the two of them, um I, I didn't want to waste too much time not doing that. So as soon as I could get into that, and obviously it becomes more pronounced as the show goes on, right? You don't want to have them launch into it so early on. That first they have to fall in love, right? But knowing that that's there, I had to do that. I'm trying to think of um, other comic premises that
Your
are
two
operating.
secondary characters were both absolutely hilarious.
Oh
Um,
yes, we love
they
them.
like steal the show in those little scenes. So um, they're just great characters.
Well, one thing I will say is that a lot of that I also get really inspired by the actors that come in. And so we've had 3 sets of actors play those parts. And uh, while I did create them, within the first draft, and they were amusing, I think, and some of that is still there. But I would say every time we had actors do it, I would kind of rewrite or adjust lines, listening to how it that came out of the actors' mouths. And we had the advantage too of this production. Those 2 actors are comically gifted actors. And so we were incredibly fortunate. I don't know that I changed a ton, honestly, for this production. I did some. They were just really good at taking my dialogue and making it funny. Um, and yeah, well, and honestly, the best friends are always, you are relieved from the burden of giving your best friend characters too much depth. So they can serve the purpose of augmenting, reporting. They're saying, and in this show in particular, they're saying the things that we're kind of they were my voice, right? Like, well, I was watching Greg and Lisa kind of like fall in love, and I had to write from a very sincere point of view, but every once in a while I would, and I would just say, oh my God, this is just insane. And I would allow that to be given voice, through those characters. And so I had great fun writing them.
And
Yeah.
if I can just add to that, one thing that I think David did really, really nicely is, in the early drafts, certainly in like the early treatment that I had written, in the first treatment, Greg, I think, was the only one with any kind of journey. And then Lisa got a journey. And so the 2 of them had story arcs, but nobody else did. And so David, I think, did a really amazing job of giving Miriam and Webb their own arcs so that they could be more than just the funny sidekick. And I think that that serves the whole story really well, is that, if somebody is a sidekick, the value of that is limited and probably can't sustain a 2+ hour show. They need to have their own arcs. They need to have their own identities. And it was a joy for me watching that happen.
It's great fun. I love I love funny characters, and I love being able to come up with different points of view and different voices for those characters. And but thank you for asking that. It's something I wish that I did more. I do a lot of it. I do a lot of comedy writing and stuff like that, but I still would like to do more. Julie says, why isn't this musical on NPX? It will be. We just haven't, we wanted the first production to kind of be under our, we didn't want it to get produced in Terre Haute where we can't check in on it. But I think now, now that we know what's going on, it's going to go up again. Then, yeah, Jeff, we should talk about putting that on NPX so that people could see it. Um, and but yeah, I didn't want to do it too soon.
Did you guys work in the same room a lot? Or did you stay in your space and it was a Zoom FaceTime kind of a thing?
We were in the room a lot. I feel like
I was going to say no, we were not in the room a lot.
Oh,
But
well, when we did the initial work, certainly. When we did like the first drafts of the music, of the scenes, we weren't in the room a lot. However, I will say that we made a point to be in the room in order to do some really hard work. So there was one moment, you remember there was that brief moment where you thought the pandemic was over, but then it really wasn't. Um, we got together in an office at a theater that was going to produce it at that time. We weren't able to do so, and we spent all day there. I mean, we must have been there for 6 hours, 6 to 8 hours or something. And our goal was literally to go by the script and lyrics line by line. And if either one of us did not understand what the other one had written, this was our last opportunity to ask. So it was our opportunity to say, I have Greg saying this line, but then he sings this lyric that is kind of a contradiction. Is that okay? Is that an interesting contradiction, or is it a sloppy contradiction? Is there? And so we really did go line by line by line by line, which sounds really tedious, but it was not. It was actually quite invigorating. Um,
Yeah, it was super fun.
yeah, yeah.
And I will say that, we came out of that. I can't speak for you, David. I thought, like, all right, we are done. Like, we are good to go. Like, this show is as good as it's gonna get. I was wrong, and we obviously continued to work on it, down to one thing that we haven't mentioned, but 2 weeks before we opened, maybe 3 weeks, but I think it was 2 weeks before we opened, I completely rewrote. Not completely. I rewrote most of one of the songs. There is the name of the song, and it was a song that it hadn't quite worked. It wasn't doing what it needed to do, and I couldn't put my finger on why. And David couldn't put his finger on why. And we had a bunch of conversations with Dawn, our director, and she sort of helped us figure out what about it wasn't working. And I kept the choruses, which were just there, THEYRE repeated. Kept that and threw out everything else, and made it better. And even that, like, it worked a lot better, and that's the version that you saw on stage. But since then, I've still changed a couple of lines, because there were lines in there that, like, that's still kind of a first draft line. And so those have been changed, and they may change again before September. Who knows? But yeah, like, any number of times I thought, like, oh yeah, we're done, we're good, and we're not done, we're not good.
I think that I've heard other composers who are much more famous than we are, um, which is all of them. But I've heard them say that they never really feel like it's done. You know what I mean? Like, even Stephen Sondheim is like, someone told me one time that they had a conversation with him, and he said, no, there are songs in Sweeney Todd I don't like. I don't think they work. If it were up to me, I would cut them, but the audience now expects them. They don't. Uh, but by the same token, I do think, and this is something that I feel like people don't talk about a lot, I do think you can lose perspective on your own work, because you forget that the audience is seeing it for the first time. I think your perspective on your own work changes when you start seeing it over and over and over again. You start noticing things that people that are seeing it once aren't going to notice. Um, you're going to forget about some of the virtues of the piece because you're taking them for granted. And so I try to be very, very careful of that. But yeah, it never quite ends.
Just to that point, Anais Mitchell, who wrote Hadestown, changed a verse in a song a month ago. That show has been on Broadway for 5 years. It, I think, won the Tony for Best Musical, and there is a verse that she said, this had never quite worked for me. And I think it was like the London production was going up, and the actor playing Orpheus was like, hey, I don't quite get how this is right. And she's like, you're correct, it's wrong. And she changed it. And, she's allowed to do that, but that's not a very common thing. It's like it's shockingly uncommon that, like, people will change shows after they've already had that, like, big production, after they've won the Tony for Best Musical. But it's nice that it can happen when it can happen.
Well, and sorry that I gave.
No, it's because I'm unmuted, and the thing that made it okay for me to play guitar makes it not okay for me to be unmuted.
Oh, okay.
Others are talking.
Gotcha. No, one thing that I oh boy, I was right at the tip of my brain. Oh, I think about this a lot, and I think about, so I just saw Let It Be too on Disney Plus, and I love watching John Lennon and Paul McCartney write together, because they are so in opposition, and they write these songs with counter melodies where John Lennon is making fun of Paul's melody, by writing his own. And some things that I really, my favorite moments in the show are at the end when in the dialogue, I wrote a lot about anger and forgiving people for their mistakes. And I did it with the point of view of the problem in this show is anger, that people are too angry and it is causing them to. And then I noticed that when you wrote the lyrics, you have characters saying to Greg, keep your passion, keep your anger. It's actually a good thing. And I wound up really loving that juxtaposition, that there were these two moments that when put together, one was kind of my point of view as I had been writing. Yours was your point of view as you were doing the lyrics. And when you put them together, I thought it really kind of creates this really rich moment where it's actually a much more complicated idea than we think. And it was the same with There. All three of us kind of had different reasons. I was really into this idea of you think you're going to be alone for the rest of your life and you're never going to have anyone next to you, and suddenly they're there. Like, that was the story in my head as I reached this. But Dawn let us know, when we first wrote the song, the word they had not really entered the culture as a pronoun, as a gendered pronoun for people who were non-binary or were presenting either non-male or non-female. It hadn't really entered the culture. So we wrote that song with a different idea than what people now, just a few years later, were hearing. And so that was something that we had to address. We really had to kind of ask ourselves, what are the points of view of these characters? What does it mean to have them using this pronoun that way? And how do we address that while still telling the story we need to tell? Fascinating.
Guys, this was great fun, but if I don't go cook dinner, I think that my husband will fall over
No,
and
that's
say
great.
really loud, horrible things in the back.
No, that's all right. Julie's still here. It looks like she just turned off her camera, but feel free to email me if you are interested in anything or have a question or anything. But otherwise, thank you for doing this, and thanks once again for contributing to the campaign.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye, Madge.
Adam,
Can
are
you
you
send those slides to the email you sent out as well?
Yes, of course.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm happy to. They're PowerPoint presentations, so they're a little big, but I actually have them in a Google Drive, so I can send you a link to the Google Drive.
Cool.
Yeah.
And I think we'll also send out just the recording of all of this, and that would be part of it.
Yes.
Folks who are not
So I
joining
think
live.
it takes it a few minutes to download, and then we'll do that.
Awesome.
Great. Nice to meet you, Adam.
Nice to meet you.
Julie,
thank you both for this time. This was really special. Thank you so much. Enjoyed the show. It's funny, I had a friend who was in a show I was directing at the time. The show was up, a children's show I was directing. And she's a friend. She's been in several of my shows. And she showed up with her whole family. And I hadn't mentioned it to her. We just hadn't had the conversation. And I said, oh, this is so exciting. Do you know Jeff? Do you know David? And she said, no, I just our family just loved the column. I had no idea that she was coming. We hadn't talked about anything, but apparently it just has, this great following. And she's also Team Oxford. I just want to say, as is her entire family. So just saying. But I've seen you recently, and I'm happy to still see you, David. I haven't seen you for a while, so this is really special.
I'm sorry that
and Adam, it's nice to meet you. But thank you so much.
Oh, absolutely. It was great to see you.
Yeah, it's been super fun.
It's great. All right, then. Awkward into the Zoom call.
Yeah.
We could do that. But yes, as soon as this downloads, I'll put together a little package and I'll put it on the Google Drive, and everyone can download the video and as well as the slides.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Great.
Have a good night.
Thank
night.
you. Good night. And I'll stop recording.